no, I don't. No. Terrible game. No.
What's wrong, sweetheart? Did you have another bad dream?
Oh my god, yes. I had the worst dream. I was playing the worst Wolverine game ever made.
But sweetheart, you're still playing the game.
No! No!
You're still playing the game.
No!
You're still playing the game.
Oh man, I need to lay off coffee and gummy worms before bed. Yep. It's that time of year again. Comic book movies! I've been a fan of the X-Men, or more specifically Wolverine, since I was about 10. And even though the movies are not exact adaptations of the comic books, I still really like them for what they are. With that said, I'm proclaiming this month as Wolverine Month!
All month I'll be basking in the glory of Wolverine and X-Men related awesomeness. I've got X-Men movies on in the bedroom, X-Men movies in the living room, X-Men cartoons on the toilet. Flipping through old Marvel Masterpiece cards.
Ooh, shiny!
Reading comics, and playing with action figures. Hey bub, why don't you watch where you're bubbing? Listen bub, I'm tired of you bubbing up the spotlight. I go where I want to go, bub. Why don't you say it to my bub, bub? Bub, bub, bub.
Of course this means... yeah, you guessed it. I'm gonna play some Wolverine games. Now the X-Men games that came out during the 16-bit era were actually pretty good. Well, most of them. However, with the Wolverine games, they really scraped the bottom of the barrel. So, without further ado, get your healing factors ready. This is Adamantium Rage on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis.
Wolverine. Wolverine. Wolverine Adamantium Rage on the Super Nintendo is a game that does everything it can to destroy your love of, well, video games. Between frustrating controls, awkward animations, useless power-ups, sterile gameplay mechanics, and awful sound and graphics, I really don't know how the developers creating this game didn't just stop production and start from scratch. Nothing works in this game without flaw, and I'll prove it to you in this review. Well, after we get a very odd musical introduction of the hero's name, we can then begin playing what I like to call Wolverine Miketendo's Rage. We get treated to a barrage of comic-themed story that plays up being intentionally vague, because as any long-standing Wolverine comic book fan knows, we love a good mystery. We know Wolverine's looking to explore his past, and it looks like a mysterious contact is trying to dangle some potential valid memories over the old knucklehead's, well, head. The problem with the story, and this goes the same for many video games, is that they're used as devices to advance levels, not actually providing smooth transitions regarding the actual tale that they're trying to tell. Adamantium Rage is the worst kind of offender when it comes to bad story in a video game. Its focus is on pushing the player through each stage without giving any kind of care to the actual player versus enemy thought process. However, there's no charisma or uniqueness to the relationship between the two. It'd be like, instead of fighting the 8 Robot Masters in Mega Man, you just destroyed boxes of cereal. That's how generic the story has become in this game. Because of the game's constant need to change levels, Wolverine travels many locations, most of which are either too generically sterile or too mystically unfamiliar to relate to anything in the comics. There's no clear vision or style in the game, it just feels like they threw everything at this game hoping something would stick. You're bouncing from a Weapon X type of laboratory to a Japanese village that also houses some weird Weapon X type of laboratory, then through a major city of Japan, a mind-melting journey through, I don't know, Mindland, USA, before finishing the game at the Hellfire Club, and later some strange creepy place that seems more out of a Spawn comic book. The game is all over the place. There's just too much color going on in this game for no reason. While I appreciate the developers flexing their creative color muscles, the graphics are, at times, overexposed to various color palettes just for the sake of using all the colors of the rainbow.
I was gonna make a reference to Skittles, but have you ever had Painter's gumballs? Or were they called Splashers? Never mind.
Let's tackle the game mechanics as well as the controls. Normally I'd discuss these separate, but this game forces us to go over two categories at the same time for numerous reasons. Adamantium Rage allows Wolverine to use his claws without hurting his healing ability. It's a huge improvement over the NES Wolverine game, but that's where the praise stops. There are several different moves Wolverine can pull off, such as delayed jump kicks, pointless non-claw attacks, and wasted attacks that are just used for opening doors. Attacks in the game suffer from issues with hitboxes being way too small and awkward in addition to awful hit detection. You'll be standing right next to an enemy and they may be able to hit you, but you can't hit them unless you turn around, walk away from them, walk back, and attack. Playing through this game, you'll fight the controls more than the enemies. Boss fights usually have some sort of puzzle to them, such as Lady Deathstrike being weak to electricity, or Cyber needing to be pushed into toxic waste vats to do damage. Some of the villains are fairly easy, but just time-consuming, such as the Black Queen. Attacking her is useless, you just have to avoid her attacks as best as possible. The problem with the bosses in each level is their difficulty is all over the place. The second mini-boss is one of the most difficult enemies in the game, since you fight 3 dudes with 1 life bar, and one of these guys has attacks that are near impossible to dodge thanks to crummy controls.
Come here. You wanna know the real enemy in this game? The freaking time limit!
Regarding Wolverine's healing factor, it's not the strongest in this game. Health drains incredibly fast, and you'll often spend a long time waiting for Wolverine to heal before moving on to the next patch of goons to destroy. The game's main focus is clearing the room of a certain quantity of enemies, similar to Gauntlet. However, since the healing factor takes so long to work, you may spend some serious time sitting around. See, for every 10% of health that's refilled, it takes exactly a minute out of your time, when you could just be, playing the game. That's 10 minutes of you sitting there doing nothing. Yeah, now that's a video game. However, after 30 total minutes in a level, this abomination shows up and instantly kills you upon capture. Known in the comics as LCD, this little girl is actually a robot that has a speech impediment, and a bomb inside of her that is an instant kill. She follows you around, and while you can dodge her for a bit, good luck trying to beat a boss while avoiding her.
Yeah, I hear you, bub.
While there are power-ups for health, they don't give much of an increase. There's even an identical-looking power-up to make Logan temporarily invulnerable, but isn't he pretty much that to begin with? If it's a Berserker Rage, wouldn't the entire screen light up red like in the comics, or even Doom? There's no clear separation of the two, you just collect and hope for the best.
Cyber, that's how I feel about this game.
There's another level where they try to force a maze on you. I spent hours on this thing, even using GameFAQs walkthrough, and I still couldn't get past this maze. The maze involves going from corridor to corridor, slashing switches to open up certain doors or gates. Some of the gates really confuse you when you get stuck, and some don't even have numbers at all. You just have to scratch at the ground and hope for the best. Moving through each area in the maze, you'll come to points where you really need to see above or below you to find out what number is listed, but the game doesn't give you the ability to see them.
So what we have here is an overcomplicated level design, mandatory kill count, and confusing time limit. Alright, what else could they ruin in this game?
The music. Holy crap, the music and sound effects are hot garbage. Every song suffers from weak, tinny synth mixed with horrible 90s hip-hop backbeats. Some of the music is borderline racist, like in Level 2's Japan level. It's like they took the world's worst 90s music and threw it into a wood chipper. Speaking of sounds, why does the final boss sound like a dot matrix printer? Why do Wolverine's claws sound like kitchen utensils?
Well, they have to be good for something other than just, slashing at doors and completely missing enemies. With that, bon appetit. I was really dissatisfied with Wolverine Adamantium Rage on the Super Nintendo. The only thing that you could possibly twist as a positive in this game is the fact that Wolverine does not take damage when he uses his claws. Unlike the Nintendo game, also published by LJN, where he does take damage. Line up every single negative thing that I've had to say about this game, and it's very clear. This is by far the worst Wolverine game I have ever played. It's also one of the worst 16-bit titles I've ever played. Now, with that said, I'm almost afraid to ask, but how does the Genesis title compare? Well, let's take a look.
Having the benefit of a completely different developer and publisher, Wolverine Adamantium Rage on the Sega Genesis may be a less frustrating title to play than its Super Nintendo brethren, but it's still not a big improvement by any means. While there are superior fighting mechanics and a much easier to understand time limit, the issues are more manageable, yet still present. We start out with a much more vague intro, however I'm really digging the feel to this game. When comparing the two games, the Genesis version definitely feels a lot more grown up. The music is tough and gritty, and really doesn't overdo the seriousness or steer into campy moments. In fact, I'd say the entire game's music feels the exact same way. This is a perfect example of matching visual and audible tones. The gritty nature of the Sega Genesis sound chip is perfect for this game. Graphically, Adamantium Rage is a bit rough along the edges, but in all the right ways. To match the gritty music, the game's graphics try not to overcomplicate things like the Super Nintendo version. Levels aren't as visually complicated, and the game seems to run a lot smoother thanks to less enemies on the screen at a time.
Doesn't this part of the game remind you of something?
While the Super Nintendo gameplay focus revolved around killing enemies to proceed, the Sega Genesis version puts a greater emphasis on platforming. Climbing and traversing levels is actually fun in this game. However, it's the combat that will turn away first-time players. Enemies seem relentless, and the game really makes things difficult to start out. There's a bit of a learning curve when it comes to learning which attacks work the best against your foes. When it comes to the bosses, things are much more about timing than anything. While this harkens back to games like Mega Man, it dumbs it down by making one-button attacks the sole timing element, instead of focusing on creating something that requires more than just simple single-button rhythm. As the game progresses, you'll feel that you're getting the hang of things combat-wise. Despite this, health recharges still take too long to work, with your healing factor taking a full 6 minutes to recharge. This is where we get to talk about the LCD time limit, which is now shown on the screen with a progress bar. As Logan advances through the level, there are times when the bar will reset. However, it's still a huge letdown that when you die, the bar doesn't always reset, which can cause you to die in practically back-to-back moments. Oh, come on. Despite a more rewarding combat system, Wolverine still controls a bit like a tank. His turning mechanisms are the biggest problem, causing you to have to completely turn around when you need to attack, leaving you open for a beating. Health also drains way faster in this game than in the Super Nintendo version, so every second counts when it comes to movement. I will say the combat is more rewarding because of the memorization attributes. Every attack works differently on each enemy, and when you suddenly realize which attack to use at which appropriate time, it'll put a smile on your face. Let's talk level balance for a second. While this version of the game has fewer levels, there's absolutely a problem when it comes to level lengths. The first level feels like an eternity, and while it's mostly because you're learning how to put up with the game's sometimes finicky controls and wonky platforming aspects, the rest of the game's levels just don't give the right balance. Some stages are super short, but give the illusion of longer length because you'll spend most of your time trying to figure out where to go and what to do to advance.
While both of these games gave me a bigger headache than Wolverine's Adamantium Rage fist, the Sega Genesis version gave me a beating that hurt the least. This game, however, has no redeemable qualities whatsoever. Thankfully, the rest of the 16-bit catalog has some pretty good games that have Wolverine in them. Just when Wolverine stars in a game, it's pretty terrible. However, there may be some exceptions to that. Wonder if there's any decent Wolverine games that I could possibly play on any system where I don't want to kill myself afterwards. Well, off to bed. Maybe I'll dream about some decent Wolverine games tonight. Who am I kidding? Well, hopefully I'll be able to go to sleep and not have any crazy Wolverine nightmares about playing horrible Wolverine games. You know, I love the character sometimes, but I feel like he gets in my head sometimes too much. Alright. Good night.